Hey, I'm Nancy Cavey, National ERISA and Individual Disability Attorney. Welcome to Winning Isn't Easy. Before we get started, I have to give you a legal disclaimer. This is not legal advice, but I will tell you that nothing will ever prevent me from giving you an easy to understand overview of the disability insurance world, the games that carriers play, and what you need to know to get the disability benefits you deserve. So off we go. Do you suffer from tinnitus, Meniere's disease, or some other profound hearing loss? Today, I'm going to be walking you through the hallmark indicators of a few hearing loss disorders, how those who suffer from the disease tackle disability claims, and tell you a real-life story about a claimant that I'm representing in the claim of the problems that you can see or experience in a Meniere's disease case. So, even if you don't have a profound hearing loss, I think you're still going to find some useful tidbits. So I'm going to talk about 4 topics. First, I'm going to do an overview of hearing loss disorders and how disability carriers evaluate hearing loss, tinnitus, and Meniere's disease. How disability carriers view hearing loss, tinnitus, and Meniere's disease claims. The medical testing you have to have for a profound hearing loss disorder. And how Unum got slammed in a Meniere's disease case, and the lessons you can learn. So let's take a break.
Have you been robbed of your peace of mind from your disability insurance carrier? You owe it to yourself to get a copy of Robbed of Your Peace of Mind, which provides you with everything you need to know about the long-term disability claim process. Request your free copy of the book at kvlaw.com today.
Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. An overview of hearing loss disorders and how disability carriers evaluate hearing loss, tinnitus, and Meniere's disease cases. You may have purchased a disability insurance policy through your employer or on your own to provide you and your family with peace of mind if you became disabled. Now, unfortunately, disability carriers don't always make it easy for policyholders who have hearing loss, tinnitus, or Meniere's disease to get the disability benefits they deserve. In fact, they hate these cases. What you need to know about different types of hearing loss the carriers don't get. Now, first off, disability carriers don't understand the different types of hearing loss. They think it's all in your head. They think you just need hearing aids and you can go back to work in an accommodated work environment. So let's start this discussion with the 3 types of hearing loss. First is conductive hearing loss, which is caused by outer and middle ear problems that prevent sound from reaching the inner ear. Sensorineural hearing loss, which is caused by damage to the sensory cells or nerve fibers in the inner ear that interfere with the transmission of information to the brain. An example of that is tinnitus. And then there's the mixed hearing loss, which is a combination of both the conductive and and mixed hearing loss, which is a combination of both. You have to produce objective medical evidence of the hearing loss that you have and the type of symptoms. And we're going to talk about that next. The symptoms of tinnitus that carriers don't get is a problem. They don't even understand what tinnitus is. And tinnitus is a sound that is generated only in your head. No one else can hear the ringing, the buzzing, the hissing, the roaring that you can experience with tinnitus. More than 80% of people with tinnitus have a hearing loss as a result of damage to the hair cells in the ear. Unfortunately, there is no cure for tinnitus, and carriers hate medical conditions with no cure. In fact, carriers will often reject out of hand or minimize the impact of tinnitus and that impact on hearing. And what they try to do is they maximize the emotional problems it causes by trying to limit benefits to just 2 years under mental nervous policy limitations. So I want to make sure that you understand, you got to spell out to your doctor all of the physical problems that you have, all the cognitive symptoms that you have, and quite frankly, you should minimize any psychological problems that you have. What are the symptoms of Meniere's disease that carriers ignore? Well, Meniere's disease is a disorder of the inner ear that's caused by episodes of spinning known as vertigo. There's also fluctuating hearing loss, tinnitus, and a feeling of pressure in your ear. Interestingly, in many cases, it affects only one ear. But again, documentation of symptoms is key. And I have found that rarely do disability carriers ask the right questions and ask for a symptom log. So let's talk about the evaluation process used by disability carriers in every hearing loss, tinnitus, or Meniere's disease claim. one is they'll ask, is there objective medical evidence that is the basis of this diagnosis? That's important because many disability policies require objective medical evidence of the diagnosis. And it's crucial that you obtain your diagnosis from an ENT or from a doctor that specializes in hearing balance disorders and that you have audiology testing. It's also key that you keep an accurate history of your symptoms and how those symptoms impact your functionality at each visit. If the carrier doesn't ask, my advice is think about it. The disability carrier will look closely at your medical records to make sure the history of your symptoms, the diagnostic findings, and the examination findings are consistent with the hearing loss, tinnitus, or Meniere's disease. Now, one way to keep a record of the frequency and severity of your symptoms and how they impact your ability to work, your productivity at work, your problems at home, or modifications that you need at home or in the workplace is to keep a diary. Now, I generally don't tell my clients to keep a diary if the carrier hasn't asked for one, because that's the carrier's problem. But if they've asked for a diary, you want to document not only the frequency and severity of your symptoms and the impact they have on your functionality, but document things like how long you can sit, stand, walk, how often you have to change positions, how often you have to, or how much you can lift, because these medical conditions can impact your ability to do those types of activities. What I want you to do is to just make sure that it's consistent with what you've put on the activity of daily living form. And don't forget to explain the side effects of medication. Step 2 is there objective medical evidence that it's the basis of the restrictions and limitations assigned by your physician. Now, your doctor is going to be asked to complete a form called an attending physician statement form explaining your restrictions and limitations. There's no uniform APS form, and the form is designed by the disability insurance company to ask your physician if you can do at least sedentary work. Why? If you can do sedentary work, you're not generally disabled under the terms of the policy. Now, the form is going to ask your physician to explain the objective medical evidence that supports the restrictions, and that can be tough because these hearing issues and symptoms can wax and wane, and you can have good days or bad days. So one way to help your physician complete the APS form is for you to explain that at each visit in terms of your symptoms and your functionality. And if appropriate, give them a diary of your symptoms. I would obviously keep a copy of it. Now, step 3 is there a causal relationship between the hearing loss, tinnitus, or Meniere's disease, the assigned restrictions and limitations, and your inability to do your own or any occupation? Now, in my view, the APS form from the carrier doesn't ask the right questions. And I will modify the APS form by using a Social Security disability hearing loss form or a Meniere's residual disability form that asks the right questions. And these forms will explain to the disability carrier your functionality in more detailed terms, because we want the right questions to be asked about your hearing loss, tinnitus, and Meniere's disease. What's going to happen is the disability carrier is going to have their medical unit review your medical records and the APS form to determine what your real restrictions and limitations are. And unfortunately, they don't have to accept what your physician has to say. The disability carrier will have a hired medical gun say, there's no objective evidence of the diagnosis, or there's no objective basis for the restrictions and limitations assigned by your physician. So what happens next? The disability carrier is going to send your file to their vocational rehabilitation counselor to determine what your occupation was at the time you became disabled, the physical duties of your occupation, the cognitive duties of your occupation, whether you can perform those occupational duties based on whatever the restrictions and limitations are that the disability carrier thinks apply. You have the burden to show a causal relationship between the diagnosis and the restrictions and limitations and your inability to do your own or any occupation. So what is your occupation? Your policy may provide that the carrier can determine your occupation, and it can be based on the Dictionary of Occupational Titles that describes the occupational duties and not necessarily how you perform them for your employer. It could be how your occupation is performed in the national economy or the local economy. All of these different types of definitions of occupation can be a problem. And I find that often the disability carrier's vocational evaluator gets the occupation wrong, and they fail to consider the cognitive duties of your occupation that can be impacted by your problems. Now, many policies provide that after a certain period of time, the standard of disability changes from an inability to do your own occupation to an inability to perform any occupation. The disability carrier is going to reevaluate your restrictions and limitations. They're going to determine whether there's any other occupation you could perform that pays similar wages. And this is not a real-world test. Often the carrier will determine that you can do a sedentary occupation just to deny benefits. Now, step 4 is going to be an analysis of what you say in your activities of daily living form and whether that's consistent with what's in your medical records, what you may be telling the adjuster during a call, or what you may be telling the field representative when they come to visit you. Remember, disability carriers are in the business of collecting premium dollars. They're not in the business of paying benefits. They're going to be looking for conflict. They're going to be looking for inconsistencies. They're going to be looking for a way to cherry pick your medical records and the description of your activities and use that as a basis of denial. And don't be surprised that even in a hearing loss case or a Meniere's disease case, they're going to check up on you and they'll put surveillance on you. Now, if you're getting calls or you suspect surveillance, you need to reach out to an attorney immediately because you're being set up for a claims denial. We want to make sure, again, that your medical records, your APS forms, everything you're telling the carrier is consistent. And I know, as I've said, that you have good days or bad days, or you may have episodes that are unpredictable. The activities that are depicted on surveillance are not necessarily going to show you having an episode, but they will potentially be used to show that you're not as impaired as you would have them to believe, and you could work in some capacity. So remember, be consistent, be careful. Let's take a break.